What if 8 kings ruled the earth for 241,000 years before the flood? What if their names are still recorded in clay, waiting in a museum? In the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England, behind protective glass, sits a small clay object. It is roughly the size and shape of a wine bottle. Its surface is covered entirely in wedge-shaped marks pressed into soft clay, pressed by hands that have been dust for 4,000 years. The marks are words in the oldest written language on Earth, Sumerian cuneiform, the script that gave birth to all writing. The object is called the Weld Blundell Prism, and what it records should be impossible. It lists every king who ever ruled Sumer from the beginning of time. Not from the founding of the first dynasty, not from the first historical records, but from the absolute beginning, when kingship itself was lowered from heaven to earth. And the numbers it records for those earliest kings defy everything we understand. About human lifespan, about history, about time itself. Before we descend into those impossible numbers, take a moment, if you would, like this video and subscribe, but only if these mysteries pull at you. The kind that refuse to fit into comfortable explanations. The kind that whisper from museum cases, patient and strange. And if you are still here in this moment, leave a comment below. Tell me where in the world you are listening from right now. Tell me what hour of the day or night you are keeping. I like to imagine this story unfolding across time zones, carried softly through the hours before sleep, wherever you happen to be. Now let us begin with a number. 241,200 years. That is how long, according to the Sumerian king list, 8 kings ruled before the great flood swept over the world. Before humanity as we know it truly began. Before history in any recognizable form existed. 8 kings, 8 reigns, 241,200 years of continuous rule, written down not as mythology, not as religious allegory, but as historical fact, recorded in the same matter-of-fact tone, used for grain receipts and tax records. The Weld Blundell Prism came into human hands in 1922. Herbert Weld Blundell was a British antiquities collector with money and taste. He was traveling through Baghdad, visiting the bazaars and markets, where ancient objects surfaced from illegal excavations. Dealers spread their goods on carpets in dim shops. Cylinder seals, clay tablets, fragments of statues, treasures pulled from the sand by looters who knew where to dig. Weld Blundell saw the small clay prism among other objects. 4-sided, covered completely in tiny cuneiform script. The dealer did not know what it said or where it came from. Just that, it was old, very old, and complete. No damage, no missing sections. Weld Blundell bought it for a sum the records do not specify, and shipped it carefully back to England, to the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford University, where scholars could examine it properly. The prism sat in storage for months before anyone looked closely. There were always more artifacts than scholars to study them. But eventually, it reached the desk of Stephen Langdon, a professor of Assyriology, an expert in ancient Mesopotamian languages. Langdon was one of the few people on Earth who could read Sumerian fluently, who could look at wedge-shaped marks and hear the words, spoken 4,000 years ago in a dead language. He began translating the prism column by column, and within hours, he realized what he was holding. A complete copy of the Sumerian king list, one of the most important historical documents from the ancient world. Other fragments had been found before in excavations, pieces from Nippur, from Lhasa, from Isin, but this was complete, intact, perfect. Every column readable, every word clear. Langdon worked through the night by lamplight. His hands, witnesses later said, were shaking as he wrote, because what the text said was impossible. And yet there it was, pressed into clay, with the same bureaucratic precision the Sumerians used for recording everything else. The prism opens with a simple declarative statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, the first city according to Sumerian tradition, the holiest, the oldest, the original settlement, where civilization itself began. And Langdon knew that Eridu was not mythological. British archaeologists had excavated it decades earlier. The ruins existed in southern Iraq, temple layers stretching back thousands of years, one built on top of another. In the same sacred location across millennia, the text continues. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Langdon stopped. Read it again, checked his translation. 28,800 years. Not 28 years, not 288 years. 28,800 years, for a single reign. He continued reading, hoping for context, for clarification, for some indication this was symbolic or poetic. But the text gave none. It simply listed the next king. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years, and the next. Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years. The list continued through 8 kings total, each ruling for periods measured in tens of thousands of years. Langdon wrote down each number with increasing disbelief. Amenluana, 43,200 years. Enmegalana, 28,800 years. Dumuzi, 36,000 years. Ensipaziana, 28,800 years. Enmenjarana, 21,000 years. Ubara Tutu, 18,600 years. 8 kings, 8 impossibly long reigns, totaling exactly 241,200 years of continuous rule, all before a single catastrophic event. Then the text delivers one short, devastating line. Then the flood swept over, and everything changes after those 5 words. After the flood, the list continues, but the numbers shift dramatically. The reigns become shorter, though still exaggerated. The first king after the flood rules for 1,200 years, then 960 years, then 840 years. The numbers gradually decrease over successive dynasties, approaching something like realistic human lifespans. By the time the list reaches kings, we can verify historically. The numbers match what we would expect: 20 years, 30 years, 40-year reigns. Langdon sat back in his chair. He had translated hundreds of Sumerian texts before. Myths about gods, hymns about temples, administrative records. He knew how the Sumerians wrote, how they distinguished fiction from fact. And this text was not written like mythology. There was no dramatic language, no poetic flourishes, no moral lessons embedded, just names, cities, numbers. The same format used for every other king list. From every other ancient civilization, the Egyptians listed their pharaohs this way. The Babylonians listed their rulers this way. Simple, straightforward chronology. This king ruled this long, then this king ruled this long. The format itself indicated the Sumerians considered this historical record not religious allegory or creative storytelling, but the numbers were impossible. Humans do not live for 28,800 years. Civilizations barely last that long. How could a single person rule for longer than all of recorded history? Langdon published his translation in 1923. The academic world responded with immediate skepticism. This was obviously mythology dressed as history. The pre-flood section was symbolic, perhaps representing cosmic ages or dynasties rather than individuals. The numbers were theological, not chronological, meant to convey divine authority and antiquity, not literal years of rule, and yet the same objections had been raised about other parts of the list. The kings who ruled for hundreds of years after the flood, those also seemed impossible. But as archaeology progressed, some of those kings were verified. Their names appeared on other tablets. Their tombs were discovered. Their inscriptions were found on monuments. The kings, the list called historical, turned out to be historical. So why assume the earlier kings were not? More copies of the king list surfaced over the following decades. Found in legitimate archaeological excavations at Nippur, at Lhasa, at Isin. Each copy varied slightly in minor details, spelling differences, additions, or omissions of some names, but the core structure remained identical across every version. 8 kings ruling before the flood. Impossibly long reigns measured in tens of thousands of years. The flood as a dividing line. Shorter reigns after, gradually approaching normal. This consistency was troubling. If the list was pure fantasy, you would expect variation. Each city would have its own version, its own preferred kings and timelines. That is how mythology evolves. Each telling adds and subtracts details. But the Sumerian king list did not evolve this way. It remained stable across centuries and cities, suggesting it was copied from a single authoritative source, preserved carefully because it was considered true. The cities named in the pre-flood section were also troubling. Eridu, Badtibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurapak. All 5 cities have been excavated by archaeologists. All 5 existed exactly where the text said they existed. All 5 were ancient, even by Sumerian standards. With occupation layers stretching back into the 5th millennium BCE, these were not invented places, not mythological locations. They were real cities where real people lived. Eridu, in particular, demanded attention. The Sumerians called it the oldest city on Earth, the place where civilization began, where kingship was first lowered from heaven. And excavations in the 1940 seconds confirmed something extraordinary. Eridu had 18 temple layers, one built directly on top of another, each constructed on the ruins of the previous one, in exactly the same sacred spot. The earliest temple dated to 5400 BCE, a small mud brick structure. The latest was a massive ziggurat from 2100 BCE. Across 3,300 years of continuous use, someone had been worshipping at that spot, building and rebuilding temples in the same location, for longer than most civilizations exist. Why such continuity? What were they preserving? What knowledge or memory required such dedication? The temples grew larger over time, more sophisticated in design and construction, as if knowledge was accumulating across generations, being passed down and built upon by priests who saw themselves as guardians of something that predated even the earliest temples. The Sumerian texts themselves claim that Eridu was the temple city of Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. The god who made humanity according to the creation myths. His temple, the E-Abzu, was dedicated to him. And the E-Abzu at Eridu was considered the first temple ever built, the prototype for all others. If Eridu was real and the temples were real, if the city itself dated back to 5400 BCE as archaeology proved, then what about the kings the text said ruled from Eridu? What about Alulim and Alalgar? The text treats them as historical figures, as the first rulers in the first city. Why should we assume they were invented, when everything else about the list has proven accurate where we can verify it? The numbers remained the stumbling block. 28,800 years for a single reign. No human lives that long. No human has ever lived even close to that long. The oldest verified person lived 122 years. The oldest biblical patriarch allegedly lived 969 years. But 28,800 years is beyond any framework we understand. It is longer than all of recorded human history combined. Unless the numbers mean something other than individual lifespans, unless the Sumerians were recording something different, something we are misinterpreting because we assume they thought like we do, about time, about history, about rulers, scholars began noticing patterns in the numbers. Every single pre-flood reign was a multiple of 3,600. Not approximately, exactly. Alulim, 28,800 years equals 8 times 3,600. Alalgar, 36,000 years equals 10 times 3,600. Enmenluana, 43,200 200 years equals 12 times 3,600. The precision was too perfect to be coincidental. 3,600 was not a random number to the Sumerians. They called it a sar, a fundamental unit in their mathematical and astronomical systems. The Sumerians used base 60 mathematics, the same system that gives us 60 seconds in a minute, and 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Their mathematics was built around multiples of 60, and 3,600 is 60 times 60. A sar. But a sar was not just a mathematical unit. It also represented cosmic cycles, periods of time, measured by the movements of celestial bodies. The Sumerians were sophisticated astronomers. They tracked Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn with remarkable accuracy. They understood these planets moved in predictable cycles that returned to the same positions over long periods. A sar might represent one complete cycle of some planetary or stellar movement. If the king list is recording astronomical periods rather than lifespans, then suddenly the numbers make sense. Alulim's reign of 8 sars might mean his era corresponded to 8 complete cosmic cycles. Not that he lived for 28,800 years as an individual, but that the period associated with him lasted 8 sars as measured by the stars. This interpretation transforms the king list from impossible biography into possible chronology. The text becomes a way of marking vast spans of time, using the only clock available to ancient observers, the movement of celestial bodies across the sky. Each king represents an epoch, an age, an astronomical period. The names are labels for eras, not individuals who lived impossibly long. But this raises a new question just as troubling. To know that cosmic cycles exist, to recognize patterns that take thousands of years to complete, requires continuous observation across many human lifetimes. The precession of the equinoxes takes roughly 26,000 years. To know this cycle exists at all, someone must track the position of stars against the horizon, year after year, generation after generation, for millennia. This requires institutional memory of extraordinary sophistication, a priesthood or academy dedicated entirely to preservation, training new observers to continue the work, maintaining detailed records without interruption, protecting knowledge through wars, famines, political upheavals. The knowledge would have to survive the collapse of cities, the death of dynasties, invasions by foreign armies. And yet, somehow, it did survive. Encoded in numbers that seemed impossible, preserved in a list that seemed like fantasy, until finally written permanently in clay. When writing made such preservation possible, the Sumerian king list might be the oldest scientific record of systematic astronomical observation, compressed into a format that could survive across millennia. The kings are not rulers but epochs. The reigns are not lifespans but cosmic ages, and the 241,200 years before the flood represents continuous observation and recording of celestial patterns across deep time. But the text itself insists these were actual kings, not abstract ages but named individuals who ruled from specific cities, who were succeeded by other named individuals. The text does not present this as symbolic or allegorical. It presents it as literal chronology, and the Sumerians themselves seem to have believed that these kings were real. More troubling still, the text explicitly identifies these pre-flood kings as Anunnaki, the divine beings who created humanity according to Sumerian mythology. The same beings named in creation myths appear here as kings ruling before the flood. Alulim is called one who descended from heaven. Enmenluana is described as shepherd of Sippar, a city whose patron god was Shamash. These are not human rulers in the text's own framework. These are gods acting as kings, divine beings who ruled Earth directly before the flood ended their reign and handed power to mortal humanity. The king list is not just recording time, it is recording a transition from divine rule to human rule, from an age when the Anunnaki governed directly to an age when humans governed themselves, with the flood as the catastrophic dividing line between these two fundamentally different epochs. If we take the text at face value, if we resist the urge to immediately dismiss it as mythology, then what it describes is this. For 241,200 years, measured in SARs or cosmic cycles, divine beings called the Anunnaki ruled Earth. From cities we can still visit today, then a great flood swept over the world. The Anunnaki withdrew from direct rule, and humans took control, with shorter lifespans and limited power. But the memory remained, preserved in careful records, passed down until writing could make it permanent. This is what the clay says. This is what the Sumerians believed, not as religious faith but as historical fact. And the prism sits in Oxford still, small as a wine bottle, heavy with impossible years, waiting for us to explain how they knew, and what it means. The numbers in the Sumerian king list are not random guesses. They are not rounded approximations or poetic exaggerations. They follow a mathematical pattern so precise that it demands explanation beyond simple mythology. Every single pre-flood rain is a perfect multiple of 3,600. Not close to 3,600. Not approximately divisible by 3,600, but exactly, perfectly divisible, with no remainder, no fractions, no approximation. This level of precision across 8 different numbers, spanning a total of 241,200 years, cannot be accidental or coincidental. Let us examine each reign carefully and systematically. Alalim ruled for 28,800 years. Divide that by 3,600 and you get exactly 8, no remainder. Alalga ruled for 36,000 years. Divide by 3,600 and you get exactly 10. Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years, exactly 12 times 3,600. The pattern continues without deviation through all 8 kings. Amenluana, 43,200 years, exactly 12 SARs. Enmegalana, 28,800 years, exactly 8 SARs. Dumuzi, 36,000 years, exactly 10 SARs. Ensipaziana, 28,800 years, exactly 8 SARs. Enmenjurana, 21,000 years. Wait, 21,000 divided by 3,600 equals 5.833. Not a whole number. But the Sumerians did not use decimal fractions. They used base 6-0 mathematics, and in base 6-0, 21,000 equals exactly 5 hours and 50 minutes. Still not a clean SAR multiple, unless we are missing something about their system. Some texts list Enmenjurana's reign as 21,600 years instead, which is exactly 6 SARs. Scribal error perhaps, or different traditions recording slightly different numbers. The final king, Ubaratutu, ruled for 18,600 years. Divide by 3,600 and you get 5.166. Again, not clean. But some versions list his reign as 18,000 years. Exactly 5 SARs. The variations suggest the numbers were transmitted orally before being written down. Small differences crept in across different cities and traditions, but the underlying pattern remained. Every reign was meant to be a whole number of SARs. This precision is encoding, not biography. When you see numbers that consistently hit mathematical benchmarks, you are not reading about individual lifespans. You are reading calculation, measurement, systematic recording of something that required mathematical precision to preserve. The SAR itself is crucial to understanding what is being recorded. The Sumerian word SAR meant both 3,600 and universe, or totality. It was the largest single unit in their numerical system. Beyond SAR, they used multiples: 2 SAR, 3 Sa, and so on. But Sa represented completion, wholeness, a full cycle. In Sumerian astronomy, the Sa had specific meaning. It represented long cosmic periods, the time it took for certain celestial alignments to return to their starting positions. The Sumerians did not have telescopes or modern instruments, but they had something more valuable: centuries of continuous observation, night after night, year after year, generation after generation of priests, recording the positions of stars and planets against the fixed horizon. Over time, patterns emerge from such dedicated observation. Venus appears in the same position every 584 days. This is its synodic period, the time between successive appearances as morning or evening star. Jupiter takes roughly 12 years to orbit the Sun. Saturn takes roughly 30 years. These are patterns visible to naked eye observation, if you record them faithfully for decades. But longer patterns require longer observation. The precession of the equinoxes is not visible in a single lifetime, or even in several lifetimes. But observe the position of stars at dawn, on the spring equinox, year after year for centuries, and you notice something slowly changing. The constellation on the horizon shifts, moving backward through the zodiac at a rate of about 1 degree every 72 years. A complete cycle through all 12 zodiac constellations takes roughly 25,920 years. This is the Great Year, the time it takes for Earth's axial wobble to complete one full rotation. Ancient astronomers knew about precession. The Egyptians knew it, the Greeks knew it, the Babylonians knew it, and the Sumerians, who preceded all of them, almost certainly knew it too. To discover precession requires institutional memory, spanning many human lifetimes. Someone must maintain the records, train new observers, ensure continuity across generations. The knowledge cannot die with one person, or even one generation. It must be preserved carefully, protected religiously, treated as sacred duty. The Sumerian temples served exactly this function. They were not just places of worship. They were observatories, libraries, schools, centers of astronomical and mathematical knowledge. The priests were not just religious leaders. They were scientists, record keepers, calculators. They tracked the movements of celestial bodies, predicted eclipses, marked seasonal changes, maintained calendars that governed agricultural cycles, and they encoded their observations in formats that could survive across time. Mathematical patterns, recurring numbers, standardized units. The Sa might represent a specific astronomical cycle that the Sumerians considered fundamental, perhaps a major planetary conjunction, or a significant period in precession, something that repeated every 3,600 years, or something symbolic that used 3,600 as a base unit for measuring larger cosmic cycles. If the king list records astronomical epochs, then each reign represents a period marked by the stars. Alulim's 8 Sas means his era spanned 8 complete cycles of whatever phenomenon the Sa measured, perhaps 8 complete Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, which occur roughly every 20 years. 8 of those equals 160 years. But that seems too short for what the text describes. Or perhaps each Sa represented 360 years, a symbolic year measured in degrees. Since the Sumerians divided the circle into 360 degrees, this would make 8 Sas equal 2,880 years, still enormous but more comprehensible than literal tens of thousands. The problem is we do not know for certain what the Sumerians meant by Sa. In astronomical terms, we know it was 3,600 inches, their number system. We know it meant totality or universe. We know it was used to measure long periods. But the exact correspondence to observable celestial phenomena remains frustratingly unclear. What we do know is that the pattern is deliberate. The mathematical precision is intentional. This is not mythology accidentally preserving numbers. This is systematic encoding of information, using a mathematical framework that the Sumerians understood completely, but which we can only partially reconstruct. The King List might be the oldest surviving scientific document, recording systematic astronomical observation across time periods longer than any individual could witness. The kings are not biological entities. They are chronological markers, labels for cosmic epochs, each associated with a specific number of stars, and together totaling 241,200 years, or 67 complete stars, before the catastrophic event that ended the age of divine rule. But the text itself resists this purely symbolic reading, because it names specific individuals, associates them with specific cities, provides details about their lives and accomplishments. Alulim is described as the shepherd of Eridu. Enmenluana is called the builder of Sippar. These are not just astronomical labels. These are characters with identities and histories. The Sumerian religious texts provide additional context. That complicates the purely astronomical interpretation, because those texts explicitly identify the pre-flood kings as Anunnaki, the divine beings who feature prominently in Sumerian creation mythology, and descriptions of early Earth. In the creation myths, the Anunnaki are described as beings who descended from heaven, who established the first cities, who created humanity to work for them, who ruled Earth directly before withdrawing to less direct roles. The King List places these same beings as the rulers before the flood in the exact cities mentioned in myths: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shurapak. The correspondence is too exact to ignore. The King List is not recording abstract astronomical periods in isolation. It is recording what the Sumerians believed was the actual history of Anunnaki rule. The stars represent their conception of how time was measured. In that distant pre-flood era, this creates an interpretive problem that scholars have struggled with for a century. Is the King List mythology dressed as history, or history encoded in mythological language, or something else entirely that does not fit our modern categories? The Sumerians themselves had no such confusion. They treated the King List as authoritative history. They copied it carefully, preserved it across dynasties and conquests, taught it in scribal schools, referenced it in other texts. They believed it was true, not symbolically true, but factually true. These kings ruled. These numbers were accurate. This history happened. Their astronomical knowledge supports this confidence. The Sumerians knew things about the cosmos that they should not have known. Without centuries of systematic observation, they knew the precise length of lunar months. They could predict eclipses years in advance. They understood planetary movements with accuracy that rivaled later Greek astronomy. They divided the sky into the zodiac, 12 constellations along the ecliptic, the apparent path the sun takes through the stars. This division requires understanding that the sun moves against the background of stars, completing a circuit in 1 year, and that this circuit passes through specific constellations. In a predictable order, the zodiac was not invented by the Greeks or the Babylonians. It was inherited from earlier Sumerian astronomy. The Sumerians also knew about planets that most ancient cultures did not recognize. They distinguished between fixed stars and wandering stars. The planets that moved against the stellar background, they tracked all 5 visible planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They knew their cycles, their periods of visibility and invisibility, their retrograde motions when they appeared to move backward through the sky. This knowledge required patient observation and careful record-keeping. Across many generations, the institutional framework existed. To maintain such long-term projects, the temples provided continuity. The priesthood provided trained observers. The mathematical system provided precise notation. everything necessary to conduct astronomy at a sophisticated level. If they could track planetary cycles across decades and centuries, why could they not track longer cycles across millennia? If they recognized patterns that repeated every 30 years, why not patterns that repeated every 3,600 years or longer? The King List might represent exactly this. The longest-term astronomical record ever attempted by ancient science. An attempt to mark cosmic time using the only units available, SARS and multiples of SARS, spanning back to the beginning of their observational tradition. But when did that tradition begin? The King List places it before the flood. In the era of Anunnaki rule, this suggests the Sumerians believed they inherited astronomical knowledge from those earlier divine rulers. They did not discover it themselves. They received it, preserved it, passed it forward. This belief appears throughout Sumerian literature. They consistently describe themselves as recipients of knowledge, not inventors. The me, the divine principles that governed all aspects of civilization, were gifts from the gods, not human achievements. Writing was a gift, mathematics was a gift, astronomy was a gift, agriculture, metallurgy, music, medicine, all gifts from the Anunnaki. If this self-understanding is accurate, then the astronomical knowledge encoded in the King List predates Sumerian civilization itself. It comes from the pre-flood era, from the 241,200 years of Anunnaki rule. The Sumerians were archivists, carefully preserving in writing what had been preserved before, through oral tradition and practical observation. The numbers are not random. They are not mythological invention. They are not symbolic approximation. They are precise mathematical encoding of astronomical knowledge that stretches back further than any written history, to a time when the gods themselves, according to Sumerian belief, ruled the earth directly and measured time in SARS. Alulim's 8 SARS, Al-Algar's 10 SARS, Enmenluana's 12 SARS, each reign marking an epoch in the long cosmic calendar that began when kingship was lowered from heaven and ended when the flood swept over, destroying the old order entirely and forcing humanity to begin again without divine rulers, with only the memory preserved in numbers that seem impossible, but might be the oldest science we have ever found. The clay prism in Oxford contains this knowledge, compressed into columns of cuneiform, waiting for us to understand what the Sumerians understood about time, about astronomy, about the Anunnaki, and the 241,200 years they claim to remember. The Sumerian King List names 5 cities where kingship existed before the Great Flood: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. These are not mythological places, invented to support religious narratives. These are real cities that have been excavated by archaeologists. Their ruins still exist in southern Iraq, exposed to wind and sun, after being buried for millennia. This archaeological verification is crucial and deeply troubling for those who want to dismiss the King List as pure mythology, because if the cities are real, and if the flood layer is real, then what about the kings? What about the 241,200 years? What about the Anunnaki? Let us begin where the Sumerians began, with Eridu, the first city. According to every Sumerian text, Eridu was the oldest settlement on Earth, the place where civilization itself started, where kingship was first lowered from heaven, where the god Enki established his temple. The Abzu, the house of the subterranean waters. The Sumerians treated Eridu with reverence that went beyond normal civic pride. Even after Eridu declined, and other cities rose to power, Eridu remained sacred. Kings traveled there for coronations, to legitimize their rule. Priests maintained the temples, long after the city population dwindled. There was something about Eridu that demanded preservation. British archaeologists began excavating Eridu. In the 1940 seconds and 1950 seconds, led by Fuad Safar and Seaton Lloyd, they dug carefully through layers of collapsed mud brick and wind-blown sand. What they found confirmed and complicated the Sumerian claims. The site revealed 18 distinct temple levels, one built directly on top of another, in exactly the same sacred location. The earliest temple, Temple I, dated to approximately 5400 BCE. It was a small, simple structure, just one room with an offering table, built of mud brick on a low platform. Nothing elaborate or impressive, but clearly constructed for religious purposes. Temple II was built directly on top, around 5200 BCE, slightly larger, better constructed. Then Temple III, around 5000 BCE, larger still with more complex architecture. The pattern continued upward through time. Each successive temple built on the ruins of the previous one. Each one more sophisticated, more massive, more carefully designed. By Temple XII, around 4000 BCE, the structure had become substantial. Multiple rooms, decorated walls, elaborate offering areas. By Temple LXI, around 3500 BCE, the building was monumental, rising high above the surrounding plain, visible for miles in all directions. The final temple, Temple XVIII, built around 2100 BCE by King Amar-Sin, was a massive ziggurat, a stepped pyramid of mud brick, ascending toward heaven. Across 3,300 years of continuous use, someone maintained this sacred spot, building and rebuilding in the same location. Why such extraordinary continuity? Most ancient sites show interruptions, gaps in occupation, periods of abandonment, but not Eridu. Generation after generation, century after century, the priests rebuilt the temple on the exact same foundation. What were they preserving? What knowledge or memory demanded such unwavering dedication? The temples themselves provide clues. The early structures are sophisticated, beyond what we expect. From the 5th millennium BCE, the mud bricks are standardized. The measurements are precise. The foundations are level. Someone understood architecture, geometry, engineering from the very beginning, and the location itself is significant. Eridu sits at what was once the edge of the Persian Gulf. In the 5th millennium BCE, the Gulf extended much farther inland. Eridu would have been a coastal city, with access to maritime trade, fishing, transportation. The Sumerians said kingship came from heaven, but they also said the first teachers came from the sea, from the Abzu, the watery deep. There are texts describing a being called Oannes, a fishman who emerged from the Persian Gulf in the time before civilization, who taught humanity writing, mathematics, agriculture, law, astronomy. He appeared during the day to instruct people, then returned to the sea at night. This figure appears in multiple sources, described as one of the Apkallu, the 7 sages who brought knowledge before the flood. Eridu was Enki's city, and Enki was god of the Abzu, of water, wisdom, creation. His symbol was the goatfish, half terrestrial, half aquatic, a liminal figure moving between worlds. The earliest temple at Eridu was dedicated to him, and remained dedicated across all 18 levels for over 3,000 years. If Eridu was real, and if it was truly the oldest city, and if it was associated with Enki and the transmission of knowledge, then the king lists claim that kingship began there, that Alulim ruled from Eridu. For 8 Sars takes on different weight. This is not arbitrary mythology. This is specific geography, connected to verified archaeology and persistent cultural memory. The second city named is Bad Tibera, also called Bad Tibera, the Wall of the Metal Workers. Archaeological surveys have located the ruins, about 35 kilometers from Eridu. The site shows occupation from the Ubaid period, around 5000 BCE, through the early dynastic period, around 2500 BCE. Bad Tibera was associated with metallurgy and the god Dumuzi, who in the king list is one of the pre-flood kings. Dumuzi ruled for 36,000 years. According to the text, from his seat in Bad Tibera, after Bad Tibera, the king list says, kingship passed to Larak. Larak has been more difficult to locate definitively, but a site called Tel al-Wilaya in southern Iraq is the most likely candidate. Surveys show occupation in the Ubaid and Uruk periods, making it contemporary with Eridu and Bad Tibera. The king listed from Larak is Ensipaziana, who ruled for 28,800 years. The fourth city is Sippar, one of the most important cities in later Mesopotamian history. Extensive excavations have revealed a massive temple complex dedicated to the sun god Shamash. The city was inhabited from at least 5000 BCE through the Neo-Babylonian period, around 500 BCE. Sippar appears in countless texts from all periods of Mesopotamian history: royal inscriptions, administrative records, literary texts, religious hymns. It was never forgotten, never lost. The king list assigns it to Enmensurana, who ruled 21,000 years before the flood. The fifth and final pre-flood city is Shuruppak, modern Tel Farah in Iraq. Excavations began in 1902 by German archaeologists and continued sporadically through the 20th century. The site revealed extensive occupation from the Jemdet Naza period, around 3000 BCE, through the early dynastic period. Shuruppak is significant for two related reasons. First, it is listed as the home of Ubaratutu, the eighth and final king, before the flood. Second, it is named, in the flood narratives themselves, as the city of Ziushudra, the Sumerian Noah, who survived the deluge by building a great boat. In the Sumerian flood story, Ziusudra is king of Shuruppak. When Enki warns him that the gods plan to destroy humanity, Ziusudra builds his boat, loads it with animals and family, and survives the 7-day deluge. The city of Shuruppak is where the story begins, where the last pre-flood king ruled, where the one human family was saved. And at Shuruppak, archaeologists found exactly what the texts describe: a flood layer, approximately 60 centimeters thick, of water-deposited silt, separating two distinct occupation periods. Below the silt was pottery and architecture from the Jemdet Naza period. Above the silt was different pottery from the early dynastic I period. The flood layer dates to approximately 2900 BCE. This is not the only flood layer found in southern Mesopotamia. Similar deposits appear at Ur, where Leonard Woolley excavated an 8-foot layer of sterile silt. In 1929, at Kish, archaeologists found a layer of flood sediment. At Uruk, Lagash, and other sites, evidence of catastrophic inundation. Around the same general period, not all flood layers date to exactly the same year. Some are slightly earlier, some slightly later. This suggests either multiple floods over several centuries, or one massive prolonged event that affected different areas at different times, as water rose and spread across the entire Mesopotamian plain. The important point is this: the flood described in the king list as the dividing line between the age of Anunnaki kings and the age of human kings was a real event that left physical evidence in the archaeological record at multiple sites across the region. If the flood was real, then what about the cities before it? The king list says 5 cities had kingship before the flood swept over, and we can verify that all 5 cities existed in the 4th and 5th millennia BCE, with occupation stretching back to the Ubaid period or earlier. These cities are not clustered together. They are spread across southern Mesopotamia, from Eridu, near the ancient Gulf shore, to Sippar, far to the north. This suggests an organized network, a civilization, not isolated villages, that recognized common authority, shared culture, and kingship, that could pass from city to city, across a wide area. The king list describes exactly this. Kingship beginning in Eridu, under Alulim and Al-Algar, then passing to Bad Tibira, under Enmen-Luana and others, then to Larak under Ensipaziana, then to Sippar under Enmen-Durana, finally to Shurapak under Ubara-Tutu. Before the flood ended, this phase of history entirely, this is not how mythology typically works. Myths usually focus on one sacred center, one holy city or mountain, but the king list describes a mobile kingship that moved between real geographical locations. This sounds less like mythology and more like political history, a record of power shifting between city-states or regions over very long periods. After the flood, the pattern continues. Kingship is lowered again from heaven, now to Kish, a new city, far to the north. The kings listed after the flood also ruled from real cities that have been excavated: Kish, Uruk, Lagash. These are not invented places. These are the great city-states of early dynastic Sumer, and some of these post-flood kings are historically verified. Enmebaragesi of Kish appears on the king list, ruling for 900 years, obviously exaggerated. But Enmebaragesi is also mentioned on other tablets found at different sites. His name appears on a votive inscription. From Nippur, his existence is confirmed by independent evidence. Gilgamesh of Uruk, perhaps the most famous figure, in ancient Mesopotamia, appears on the king list, ruling for 126 years, still exaggerated but approaching. Something like possible, Gilgamesh was long thought to be purely mythological, a legendary hero, not a real king. But in the 1950 seconds, the Sumerian king list was vindicated. When archaeologists found Gilgamesh mentioned on separate administrative tablets from the early dynastic period, he was a real king who ruled Uruk around 2700 BCE. The myths about him fighting Humbaba, seeking immortality, may be legendary elaborations, but the king himself was real. This pattern is crucial. The king list becomes more historically accurate as it approaches the present. The further back it goes, the more exaggerated the numbers become. But the names remain real, the cities remain real, the basic framework remains consistent with what archaeology reveals. This suggests the king list is not pure fantasy, but historical memory, increasingly distorted by time. The recent past is remembered clearly. The distant past is compressed, exaggerated, mythologized, but not entirely invented. If the post-flood kings are based on real people, in real cities, why assume the pre-flood kings are completely invented? Why not assume they too are based on something real, even if the numbers are symbolic or astronomical, rather than literal lifespans? The pre-flood kings are associated with the Anunnaki in Sumerian religious texts. These were divine beings, according to Sumerian belief, who established civilization, who ruled directly, before withdrawing to heaven or the underworld. After the flood, the 5 pre-flood cities all have temples dedicated to specific Anunnaki: Eridu to Enki, Bad Tibira to Dumuzi, Sippar to Shamash or Utu. Each city was the cult center for a particular deity. this religious geography matches the political geography of the king list. The cities existed, the temples existed, the cultural memory existed, that these places were ancient, sacred, connected to the gods. The king list preserves this memory in chronological form, claiming these cities hosted kingship itself. In the age before the flood, when the Anunnaki ruled, we cannot verify that Alulim ruled for 28,800 years. We cannot prove that he was an Anunnaki or that such beings existed, but we can verify that Eridu existed, that it was the oldest city, that it had 18 temple levels, stretching back to 5,400 BCE, that the Sumerians considered it the origin point of civilization. We can verify that all 5 pre-flood cities were real places, inhabited for millennia, with religious significance, that persisted long after their political power declined. We can verify that a flood destroyed these cities around 2,900 BCE, leaving a layer of silt, exactly as the king list describes, and we can verify that after the flood, new cities rose to power, Kish, Uruk, with new dynasties, whose kings gradually approach historical reality. As we move forward in time, the king list's basic framework is supported by archaeology. The cities are real, the flood is real, the post-flood kings become increasingly historical. This does not prove the 241,200 years are literal, or that the Anunnaki were real, but it does prove that the text is not random fiction. It is something else. Historical memory, perhaps, encoded in numbers. We do not fully understand, preserved by a civilization that treated this document as authoritative truth about their past. And the beings who ruled before the flood swept over, the ruins remain, the flood layers remain, the temples remain, and the question remains. If the geography is accurate, and the flood is accurate, and the post-flood history becomes increasingly accurate, then what about the rest? What about the 241,200 years? What about the 8 kings who ruled before? Everything changed. The flood swept over. 5 words in Sumerian that divide all of history into before and after. Everything that came before those words belongs to one world. Everything that comes after belongs to another completely different world. Before the flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. Divine beings called Anunnaki governed directly from their temple cities. Time was measured in sars, in cosmic cycles incomprehensible to mortal understanding. After the flood, kings ruled for hundreds of years, then decades, then normal human lifespans. The gods withdrew to heaven. Humanity took control. Time became human-scaled, comprehensible, limited, mortal. The flood is not just a dividing line. In the king list's chronology, it is the dividing line. In all Mesopotamian understanding of history and time, every Mesopotamian culture that followed the Sumerians organized history the same way. Before the flood, after the flood, 2 completely separate eras, separated by catastrophe. The Atrahasis epic provides the fullest account of what the flood meant and why it happened. The text opens in the distant past, when the Anunnaki gods performed their own labor digging canals, maintaining irrigation, building the infrastructure that kept the world functioning. The lesser gods, the Igigi, grew resentful of this endless work. For 3,600 years they labored. Then they rebelled, threw down their tools, marched on Enlil's house, demanding relief. The crisis threatened divine civil war. Enki proposed a solution: create a new being to do the work instead. Humanity was designed, genetically engineered, from clay and divine blood. specifically to serve as workers. The Agigi were freed. Humans took their place in the fields and canals. But humanity multiplied, far beyond expectations. We grew numerous, spread across the land, built our own cities, made noise that disturbed the gods' rest and peace. Enlil, in particular, could not tolerate the constant sound of human activity. The text describes Enlil lying awake at night, unable to sleep because of human noise below. He calls a council of the great gods, proposes a solution: send a flood, drown all humanity, wipe the slate clean, return the world to silence. Most gods agree immediately. They are tired of managing humanity, tired of responding to prayers, tired of requiring offerings. Better to eliminate the problem and perhaps try something different, or nothing at all. But Enki opposes this plan. Humanity is his creation, his responsibility. He argues for population controls. Instead of total destruction, introduce disease, impose sterility on some women, limit human reproduction naturally. But Enlil refuses compromise. He wants complete annihilation. The gods swear an oath together. None will warn humanity about the coming disaster. The flood must take them completely by surprise to ensure no survivors. Enki swears the oath, along with the others. But Enki is clever, known for finding loopholes. He is forbidden from warning humans directly, but not from speaking to walls or reeds that might overhear. Enki goes to the reed hut of Atrahasis in Shuruppak, stands outside where Atrahasis sleeps, and speaks clearly to the wall. Reed hut, pay attention. Wall, hear my words. The flood is coming. Build a boat. Save your life and animals. Atrahasis hears everything. He understands Enki is warning him, indirectly, cleverly, without breaking the oath. He tears down his house, uses the reeds and wood to construct a massive boat. His neighbors watch and mock. Building a boat in the desert? Have you gone mad? But Atrahasis continues working, day and night, until the cube-shaped vessel is complete and sealed. Then the rain begins. Not ordinary rain, but impossible deluge, water falling like walls from the sky. The gods themselves become terrified. They retreat to highest heaven, cowering like dogs, watching their creation drown below. The flood continues. For 7 days and nights, everything dies. Every human, every animal. The cities vanish beneath water. The temples collapse. The fields disappear. The world becomes silent, empty, drowned, destroyed. When the rain finally stops, the gods realize their mistake. They destroyed their workforce. Who will build temples now? Who will offer sacrifices? Who will maintain the cosmic order? The gods sit in heaven, hungry, regretful, weeping. Then Atrahasis emerges. From his sealed boat, he offers sacrifice, burning incense and meat. The smell rises to heaven, and the starving gods gather like flies around the offerings. Enlil arrives, sees the survivor, becomes furious. Who warned humanity? Who broke their oath? But Enki steps forward, admits his role, argues that destroying all humanity was a terrible mistake. After debate and hunger, the gods reach a compromise. Humanity will be allowed to survive, but limits will be imposed. Some women will be barren. Some infants will die young. Priestesses must remain celibate. Demons will cause miscarriages. These measures will control population without requiring another flood. The Gilgamesh flood story follows the same basic pattern. Utnapishtim is warned by Ea, another name for Enki. He builds a boat, survives the 7-day flood, offers sacrifice afterward. The gods regret their decision, grant him immortality. As compensation for his suffering, the Eridu Genesis, the oldest written version, describes Ziusudra receiving warning, building his boat, surviving the deluge, being granted eternal life, placed in Dilmun, the paradise at the world's edge. Different names for the hero: Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, Ziusudra. Different details in the telling, but the core narrative remains completely consistent across all versions, across all time periods. The gods decided to destroy humanity. One god warned one human. That human built a boat, survived with family and animals. The world was drowned. Then the waters receded. Humanity was allowed to continue with limitations. This story is not unique to Mesopotamia. Flood narratives appear in cultures worldwide, often with striking similarities to the Sumerian account. The biblical story of Noah is clearly derived from Mesopotamian sources the Hebrews encountered these stories during the Babylonian exile. Around 600 BCE, they adapted the narrative, made it monotheistic, added moral dimensions, but the structure is identical. God decides to flood the world, warns Noah specifically. Noah builds an ark, takes family and animals. The flood covers the earth. For 40 days and nights, the ark comes to rest. On a mountain, Noah sends birds to test if land appeared, offers sacrifice afterward. God promises never to flood again. The parallels are too exact to be independent invention. The biblical authors knew the Mesopotamian versions and adapted them for their own theology, but flood stories appear far beyond the ancient Near East, in cultures that had no contact with Mesopotamia, no access to their libraries, no knowledge of their texts. The Greek myth of Deucalion describes Zeus flooding the world to destroy wicked humanity. Deucalion builds a chest. On advice from his father Prometheus, survives with his wife Pyrrha. The waters recede. They repopulate the earth by throwing stones that become people. Hindu tradition describes Manu, warned by the fish avatar of the god Vishnu about coming flood. Manu builds a boat, saves the 7 sages and seeds of life. The flood destroys the world. Manu's boat survives. Humanity continues. Chinese legends describe Gun Yu and the great flood that threatened to destroy all civilization. Yu worked for years to control the waters through engineering and perseverance. He succeeded and became a great king and hero. Native American tribes across North America preserve flood traditions. The Ojibwe speak of Nanabojo, who survived on a raft with animals. The Hopi describe climbing into hollow reeds. As water rose, the Aztec Codex tells of the 4th sun ending in flood. Polynesian myths describe the angry god Tahiri sending floods to destroy humanity. Only a few humans survived by fleeing to mountaintops. Over 500 distinct cultures have flood narratives. In their mythology, this is one of the most universal mythological patterns found anywhere on Earth. The details vary, but the core remains. The world was flooded. Most humans died. A small group survived. Humanity continued. Why such universal agreement? The standard academic explanation is that floods are common. Local floods occur regularly. In river valleys worldwide, each culture experienced devastating floods locally and mythologized them into world-ending events. The similarities are coincidental, different responses to common experience, but this explanation struggles with the specific similarities: the warning from a god, the boat or vessel, the specific duration, the sending of birds, the sacrifice afterward. These details repeat too precisely to be independent invention. An alternative explanation is shared memory of an actual event that affected humanity globally. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose over 400 feet as glaciers melted. Coastal settlements worldwide were drowned beneath rising water. This was not a sudden flood, but a process over several thousand years. Yet, to people living through those millennia, it would seem like the world was ending, the ocean steadily advancing, consuming everything, coastal lands disappearing, forever beneath waves. Humanity, 12,000 years ago, lived primarily near coasts, where resources were abundant. Fishing, shellfish, marine mammals provided reliable food. Coastal plains offered fertile ground for early agriculture. If civilization existed before the Ice Age ended, it would have been concentrated on coasts, now submerged completely. The flood stories might preserve compressed memory of this long catastrophe passed down through oral tradition for 10,000 years or more until writing captured them. In their mythological form, the Sumerian version would be the oldest written account of this ancient memory. The 241,200 years before the flood might represent the entire span of human civilization, before sea level rise, before the coasts drowned, before the old world ended. The Younger Dryas period provides additional context. 12,800 years ago, something triggered sudden climate catastrophe. Temperatures dropped dramatically. The Ice Age that was ending suddenly returned. For 1,200 years, glaciers advanced again. Megafauna went extinct. Human populations crashed. Then 11,600 years ago, the cold ended abruptly. Temperatures rose rapidly. Glaciers melted quickly. Sea levels rose. Coastal lands flooded. And shortly after, agriculture appeared. In multiple locations, Göbekli Tepe was built. In Turkey, Jericho was established. In the Levant, civilization emerged. From catastrophe, what if the flood remembered? In all these stories, is this Younger Dryas event, or the rapid sea level rise that followed its end? The 241,200 years of Anunnaki rule could be the entire span of human development before this catastrophe, compressed and encoded in the King List's mathematical framework. The flood was real. The geological evidence proves it. Sea levels rose, coastlines drowned. Civilizations, if they existed, would have been destroyed. The survivors retreated inland, preserved what knowledge they could, started again. In new locations, the Mesopotamian plain was inland, protected from sea level rise, but not from local flooding. The Tigris and Euphrates regularly overflowed, depositing the silt layers that archaeologists have found at Ur, Shuruppak, Kish. The Sumerians may have experienced both catastrophes. Ancient memory of the global sea level rise, compressed into myth, combined with recent memory of local Mesopotamian flooding around 2,900 BCE, both merged into one flood narrative. The King List preserves all of this. The 241,200 years before represents deep time before the catastrophe. The flood that swept over represents the catastrophe itself. The post-flood kings represent the recovery as civilization rebuilt. This interpretation makes the King List not mythology but compressed history of the entire human experience, encoded in numbers, preserved across millennia, finally written when writing appeared in Sumer. The flood is not just a dividing line. In Sumerian history, it is the dividing line. In all human history, between the old world that drowned and the new world that emerged, between the age when gods ruled and the age when humans ruled, between the 241,200 years we do not remember, and the 5,000 years we call history. The flood marks the transition from the unknowable past to the knowable present, from the age of Anunnaki to the age of humanity. And the clay records sit in museums, patient and precise, describing what happened in 5 simple words. That changed everything. The flood swept over. What if the Sumerian king list is correct? Not literally, perhaps. Not in every specific detail, but correct in its essential claim that human history extends back far further than we imagine. That beings the Sumerians called Anunnaki ruled for vast epochs before the flood changed everything. The numbers need not be literal years. We have established that they are likely astronomical encoding, SARs representing cosmic cycles, each reign marking an epoch. In a calendar measured by stars, 8 SARs for Alulim, 10 SARs for Alalgar, 12 SARs for Enmenluana, each number precisely calculated, each period carefully marked. If we accept this framework, the 241,200 years become 67 complete SAR cycles of whatever phenomenon the Sumerians were measuring, perhaps precession of the equinoxes, perhaps major planetary conjunctions, perhaps some other celestial pattern that repeated over millennia and required continuous observation to track and record. This interpretation transforms the king list from impossible biography into possible chronology, a record of continuous astronomical observation spanning back to the beginning of Mesopotamian civilization, or before, to whatever culture first began watching the sky, systematically recording patterns, training observers across generations. The Sumerians claimed explicitly that they inherited this knowledge. They did not invent writing. It was given to them by the Anunnaki. They did not discover mathematics. It was taught to them. They did not develop astronomy. Through trial and error, they received it complete from those who came before. If this claim is accurate, then the knowledge encoded in the king list predates Sumerian civilization entirely. It comes from the pre-flood era, from the 241,200 years, when the Anunnaki ruled. However we interpret what Anunnaki means and what ruled entails, the Sumerians were not inventors, they were archivists, carefully preserving in cuneiform what had been preserved before. Through oral tradition, through practical observation, through institutional memory, maintained across catastrophe. After the flood swept over, after the old world drowned, after the Anunnaki withdrew, humanity inherited the ruins and the knowledge. We became the caretakers of astronomical records we did not understand, but faithfully copied. The post-flood section of the king list shows this transition clearly. The reigns gradually shorten from 1,200 years to 900 years to 400 years to 200 years, eventually reaching normal human lifespans. This is not sudden, but gradual progression, as if the list itself is transitioning from one mode of timekeeping to another, from cosmic time, measured in SARs, to human time, measured in years, from epochs marked by celestial cycles to reigns measured by human lifetimes. The king list preserves both systems in one document. This makes it unique. Among ancient texts, it bridges the gap between mythological time and historical time, between the age of gods and the age of humans. It provides a framework for understanding how one became the other. The Anunnaki did not simply vanish. According to the texts, they withdrew gradually. From direct rule, after the flood, they became distant, less involved, more mythological. But they did not disappear completely or suddenly. Sumerian texts describe the gods becoming less accessible over time. In the earliest myths, gods walk among humans, speak to them directly, intervene in daily affairs. But in later texts, the gods are distant, communicating through dreams, through omens, through priests, no longer present in the physical way they once were. This transition matches what the king list describes. After the flood, kingship returns to earth. But the kings are human now, mortal, limited. The gods observe from heaven, bless certain kings, grant legitimacy through temples, but do not rule directly, as they did before. Why did they withdraw? The flood narratives suggest the gods regretted creating humanity. We became too numerous, too noisy, too independent. The flood was meant to eliminate us, but Enki saved a remnant, against the will of the other gods. After the flood, humanity was allowed to continue, but with restrictions, population controls, limited lifespans. We were no longer the perfect servants the Anunnaki intended. We were flawed, mortal, somewhat independent. Perhaps the Anunnaki realized they could not control us. After the flood, perhaps they decided to step back and let us govern ourselves, while they watched from a distance. Or perhaps the flood weakened them somehow. The catastrophe that nearly destroyed humanity may have affected them too, forced them to withdraw, not by choice, but by necessity. The texts are ambiguous about what happened to the Anunnaki. After the flood, some remained in temples, receiving offerings. Some descended to the underworld, becoming judges of the dead. Some simply faded from the record entirely, mentioned less and less, until they became pure mythology, but their legacy remained. In the cities they founded, in the knowledge they taught, in the astronomical records they maintained, in the 241,200 years encoded in clay for us to inherit. We are those inheritors. Humanity after the flood, building on foundations we did not lay, using knowledge we did not discover, maintaining temples to gods who withdrew, copying king lists we barely understood. From 2900 BCE, the approximate date of the Mesopotamian flood layers, to now is only 5,000 years, a tiny fraction of the 241,200 years the king list records. Yet in those 5,000 years, humanity has transformed from scattered farming villages to a global technological civilization. We invented metallurgy, developed writing systems, built massive cities, created mathematics and science, explored the entire planet, developed medicine, composed art and music, and eventually left Earth entirely, traveling to the moon and sending probes beyond our solar system. We have become what the Anunnaki were, if the Sumerians described them accurately: beings with advanced knowledge, technological capabilities, the ability to engineer life, to shape the world, to observe the cosmos. We edit genes now, just as the Anunnaki allegedly edited human DNA, mixing divine essence with earthly clay. We create new organisms, design life forms that never existed until we made them. We track celestial bodies with telescopes and satellites, just as the Anunnaki tracked them with naked eyes. And patient centuries of observation, we measure cosmic time in precisely the way the king list suggests they did. We are creators now, engineers of life, observers of the universe, shapers of reality. We have become what our creators were. If the stories are true, if the king list preserves actual history, however encoded, perhaps this was always the intended outcome. Perhaps the Anunnaki did not create permanent servants, but eventual successors, beings who would grow beyond their origins, surpass their creators, inherit their role in the cosmic order. The 241,200 years of rule ended with the flood. The age of Anunnaki direct governance concluded. The age of humanity began, not as slaves, but as inheritors, not as tools, but as potential equals. We are still young, only 5,000 years. Since the flood, since kingship was lowered to human hands, since we began keeping our own records, building our own cities, making our own decisions. But we are growing, rapidly, dramatically. In another 5,000 years, if we survive, we will be unrecognizable. From what we are now, we will likely have spread to other planets, perhaps other stars. We will create life. Where none existed, we will engineer worlds. To suit our needs, we will do what the Anunnaki allegedly did here on Earth. We will become what they were, or something beyond them. The cycle continues. Creators, creating, creators, who create in turn. The wind moves across the Mesopotamian plain. In the hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath, it carries dust. That was once Eridu, once Shuruppak, once the 5 cities, where kingship existed before the flood. The temples are ruins now, exposed to sun and wind. After being buried for millennia, the ziggurats have collapsed into shapeless mounds. The canals are filled with sand and silence. The voices are gone that once echoed through those streets. But the clay remains. In the Ashmolean Museum, in other museums, in storage rooms and private collections, small fragments that survived. When everything else turned to dust, the Weld-Blundell prism sits behind glass, small as a wine bottle, covered in wedge-shaped marks, pressed by hands that have been dust for 4,000 years. The marks are still readable, the numbers still precise. 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years, impossible numbers that refuse to be easily dismissed because they follow mathematical patterns too precise to be random, because they are associated with real cities, real temples, real archaeology, because the text treats them not as mythology, but as history. The Sumerian scribes, who copied the king list, believed every word. They were not writing religious allegory, they were not inventing creative fiction, they were preserving what they considered authoritative truth about their past, about the gods, about the beginning of everything. They were professionals, trained for years in scribal schools, to copy accurately, to preserve faithfully, to maintain records that civilizations depended on. They knew the difference between myth and history, between hymn and chronicle, and they treated the king list as chronicle, as fact, as something that happened. Whether they were correct, we cannot say with absolute certainty. The 241,200 years remain enigmatic. The Anunnaki remain mysterious. The Sar cycles remain partially understood. But we can say this: the king list is not random fiction. It is not careless mythology. It is something else, something that requires our attention and respect, even if we do not fully understand it, even if it challenges everything we think we know about time, about history, about ourselves. The numbers do not lie. They are too precise, too patterned, too deliberate. They encode something we have lost, the ability to read, but which the Sumerians preserved faithfully, hoping we would one day understand. In the hours before dawn, when sleep comes softly, like water rising, the memory rests. 241,200 years, compressed into silence, into numbers on clay, into stories about gods who ruled before the flood swept over. 8 kings, 8 impossibly long reigns, 8 epochs marked by the stars, Alulim and Alalgar, Enmenluana and Amenluana, Enmegalana and Dumuzi, Ensipaziana and Enmenjurana, Ubara Tutu the last. Before the water came, their names preserved, their cities excavated, their temples ruins, but their memory enduring in the clay that remembers what flesh forgets. We were made, we were taught, we were left to inherit a world we barely understood, but slowly, very slowly, we are learning, we are growing, we are becoming what they were. The clay prism waits in its museum case, patient as stone, heavier than it looks, small enough to hold in 2 hands, but containing the weight of ages, 241,200 years, in cuneiform, in numbers, in memory. The flood swept over. 5 words, that changed everything, that ended one world and began another, that separated the age of gods from the age of humans, that divided all of time into before and after. We live in the after, building on ruins we did not create, using knowledge we did not invent, inheriting a legacy older than memory, deeper than history, stranger than we. Allow ourselves to imagine the Anunnaki ruled for 241,200 years, or 67 SARs, or 67 epochs, or some span of time we can no longer properly comprehend. They watched the stars, marked the cycles, kept the records, built the cities, created humanity. Then the flood came, and everything changed, and we began. The story we remember, the 5,000 years we call history, built on the foundation of the 241,200 years we do not remember, but which the clay faithfully preserves. In the silence before dawn, the question whispers, what if they were right? What if the king list records actual events, however encoded, however transformed by time and language? What if we are the children of that impossible age, inheritors of knowledge, older than we know, carrying forward a legacy that stretches back beyond the flood, beyond the cities, beyond the beginning of everything we call civilization? The wind carries dust, the ruins sleep, the clay endures, and we, the created, the taught, the abandoned, the inheritors, continue forward into whatever comes next, carrying memories, pressed into clay 4,000 years ago, recording events from 241,200 years. Before that, the numbers remain patient and perfect. 28,800, 36,000, 43,200. Impossible and precise, like memories of a dream. That might have been real, that might have been the oldest truth we have ever found. And in the quiet, before sleep claims us, the question lingers, soft as dust, heavy as time. What if the Sumerians were right?